Good evening, gamers, and welcome to episode 18 of Games with Dave. Tonight, I am joined by Trevor Stamper from Blind Visionary Publications, the mind behind the DCC and MCC compatible zine Tales from the Smoking Wyrm. This project is fully funded and is pushing towards some really cool stretch goals. There's just about 17 and a half hours, I believe, Trevor, left for
That
this.
sounds about right.
And left to back this zine. So click on the link in the description if you haven't backed it already and give it a backing and help get those stretch goals. Thanks so much for joining me tonight, Trevor. I'm glad to have you on.
Absolutely, Dave. Not a problem. Thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure. So one of the first things I had and something that really fascinated me when I saw it doing my research was back on episode 76 of RPG Rambling. You had mentioned that you had picked up a full printing press collection of,
That's absolutely true.
and I believe at the time of that episode, it was about 7 months ago, that you had the foil stamper refurbished.
I do. As a matter of fact, hold on a second.
Yeah.
Here's an example of that. This is a reject because it has a stain in it. But this is a copy of For Whom the Bell Trolls, which was our Smoking Wyrm
Mhm.
monographs #1. And in the inside back cover, you can see this is a foil stamped logo of the Smoking Wyrm,
That
which
is
is the
so cool.
sign that hangs outside of the Smoking Wyrm. You can see it on the cover of many, if not all, although issue 5 doesn't have it, of the Smoking Wyrm monographs or issues of the zine. And if you look, hold on, I got a bone folder down here. This is a pocket that's designed to hold. Here, let me pop that open. This one's never been opened. It's
Oh,
a
wow.
pocket, as you can see here, right? And it's designed to hold the 18 tarot size cards that came with this issue. So I actually designed this, cut them on a Cricut, um, foil stamped them, and hand glued all of them, and then glued them into the booklet. And as a matter of fact, this booklet, if you look at this page, super thick. It's actually a doubled over, so it's a trifold that's been folded over, and they didn't glue it. I glued that in place first.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so that was our first foil stamping effort and everything, and there's more coming. But as a matter of fact, just this week, so when I bought the collection, it wasn't in disrepair, but it was in kind of an extended period of neglect. Does that make sense?
Yep.
It hadn't been used in, I didn't get a quite good number on this, but anywhere between 10 to 20 years is how long the equipment had sat unused for the most part. And so during that time period, you get kind of surface rust because most of it's cast iron,
Right.
or, it gets dusty and dirty and grimy because it was sitting in this guy's 3-season porch, and things like that. And so we purchased it was the Book Doctor in just south of Dayton, Ohio, or Columbus, Ohio. We purchased his entire equipment, and some of his equipment had originally come from Ohio State in the 50s, and then some of it was at least 200 or 300 years old.
Wow.
And so there's in bookbinding there's a lot of cast iron presses that come about in the 1900s, late 1900s, early 2000s, or well, basically late 1900s, or early 1900s, late 1800s. And then there's stuff that goes back even further. It's usually made of wood, and these are coming usually in the form of presses. And so they would be the wood little presses that you crank together, and they hold the book, and then you can do work on the book and stuff. So those are called lay presses. Most of them are, anyway. So I bought all the equipment. I moved it to Cincinnati, where I work, and set up a shop about a mile from my home in a building, that, because I don't have a garage or anything here in my house. And so I've been refurbishing that equipment slowly. And actually, the reason why the foil stamping stuff I was working with it 7-8 months ago, was I built a new workbench and gotten rid of the original workbench all that equipment sat on. And that allowed me to organize all of brass and lead type that came with it. I probably own over 100,000 individual pieces of type now.
Oh, wow.
It's like it's a lot. there, there's a lot, and I keep finding more in the collection as I unearth and work through it. Because I mean, part of what I got were just boxes and boxes of stuff that had boxes of stuff inside of it. And he was like, "This stuff is all bookbinding stuff. You just take it and put it in your truck." And so I hadn't even had time to sort through a lot of that when I bought the equipment. So yeah, the foil stampers were the very first things we refurbished, and we got them working. Um, these are foil stampers that would have been made between 1920 and 1950 or 60. And so two different brands, one out of Chicago called Pleasure, the other one called Kensal, and we use those. So that's been really interesting. And as a matter of fact, I custom made the Smoking Wyrm stamp, learned how to order one of those and how to produce what they needed in files and everything. And I got a couple more coming. And then recently, as in this week, I finally finished the second refurbished workbench. I'll be installing it this Friday, and that will expand my work even further. It'll give me a much better working space to work on sewing. I've got an antique sewing frame. So this will allow me to sew signatures together by hand. It'll allow me to make books. There's just a whole bunch of workbench and potential that I can work on now that I have this second thing. And I have a high quality photo printer that can do volume that I
Nice.
purchased about a year ago. And this will finally get set up, which will allow me to do other things. So there's a whole that's, basically these projects are intertwined. There's we're producing physical products, but other people are printing them. But the ultimate goal is to move to where I own the means of production for the majority of things. So if I want to make it myself, I can just make it myself,
That sounds really cool.
if that makes sense.
Yep, it does. Because that was actually my next question. I was going to ask you if your goal was towards making everything yourself or still having a
Yeah,
printer.
I mean, there are things that I don't mind sending out to get published, right? And so like, when you back the Kickstarter, you're getting a limited edition version of this as a risographic printed one, a copy of Tales from the Smoking Wyrm. And then after that, I have standard editions, which are a different printing method. They're just as robust. They're maybe not as archival quality and everything, but they're also, a little cheaper. And so my focus is on producing the premium thing. But I understand that some people can't afford that. And so, months later, once we sold out of the premium thing, then we move on to a standard edition of it. And so that's kind of the thinking there. And then, but yeah, the goal is to be able to produce my own thing. We have in Dungeon Crawl Classics, there's a lot of different things you can build and a lot of different interesting products to make that haven't been made yet. And so I've got several products in mind that will be 100% scratch built, except for instance, mechanical mechanisms or something that I purchased that get integrated into it.
Gotcha.
So, right.
That sounds really, really cool, though, that it'll be
Thanks.
kind of like a one-stop shop for yourself to be able to do almost everything.
That's right. So the idea is, I've been retooling myself career-wise. And for the last year and a half, 2 years, I have been learning how to be a bookbinder and how to make books from scratch. Books, boxes, slip cases, a whole host of 3-ring binders, stuff like that, right? All of this type of material in various materials, whether it's in paper, whether it's in leather, and stuff like that. So the goal is to be a one-stop shop and to say, I want to make a product. And I want to make sure that I can make that product because, first of all, I can pay myself to do the work, and I'm cheaper than going out and having it done. Let me give you an example. So it took me a cost to set up the Cricut and purchase that, and a cost for the stamp and everything. Those are inherent costs in producing these sleeves. But to produce the number of sleeves I wanted for the original print run was going to cost 4 to 5 times what I ended up paying for the for the equipment and everything I needed to be able to produce them myself whenever I wanted.
Wow.
And so once you've invested in the in the equipment, the paper costs are only a small portion of what you're paying for when you have someone print a print run. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
And that's crazy, the savings of,
Yeah, the savings
not
is
paying 4 to
astronomical.
5 times.
Well, and it makes sense because, okay, so most people, vast majority of zine people that I talk to nowadays are getting their, especially in the United States, are getting their zines printed at big mega print shops, right? So Mixam is an example of that. Pirate Ninja is another. Is it Pirate Ninja? No, that's the shipper. There's a Print Ninja. Print
Yes.
Ninja is another example of that and stuff. And those people are using essentially really big industrial inkjet printers. Okay, they're you can look it up. It's called the Indigo. It's called the HP Indigo. I think HP Indigo 9600 or something is what it's called. And it's like a $2 million inkjet printer. It's the size of a mobile home,
Wow.
right? And so when you have to buy that big of a piece of equipment, well, you don't buy it, you rent it, and then you have maintenance costs and everything to it. So that's why things cost so much to get produced, because the equipment, to produce them is expensive. So most people aren't purchasing that equipment because, you know, print, inkjet printers don't last forever, right? So the Indigo it's got a shelf run. This is just like a photocopier in many ways, right? They can only do so many clicks per hour or per day or per month. And at a certain point, you've basically worn the machine out and it gets thrown away. And so that's different than hand making stuff, which, those machines are made of cast iron. They have a high wear life. There's one guy who's dedicated his life to replacing Kensal parts because the Kensal went out of production. That's the foil stamper I use.
Yep.
Went out of production like 20 years ago. And he was telling me, when I finally found this guy, because I was looking for a manual for my Kensal. And he was like, "Oh, this is the manual you need." He gave it to me. He said, "It's online. You just go download it." And he said, "You bought a good machine. It will never break, right? The only thing you need to do is lubricate it, and you may have to change the thermostat. And this machine is essentially impervious, right? It's
Wow.
solid cast iron. You can't use enough force on it to break it." He's like, "There's just nothing you can do to break this machine. It will last you for your life."
Yeah, they don't make machines like that anymore.
And they don't make machines like that anymore, right? Yeah.
It's too
So
bad that they don't.
no, I kind of agree with that. So yeah, so that was the thinking, was that I wanted to be able to own the means of production so that I could produce whatever I wanted to and lower the overall cost, so that it doesn't become exorbitantly expensive. Because the reason why, like, big box sets from companies, even like Goodman Games or Wizards of the Coast or something like this, or Pathfinder, those box sets, or Chaosium, those box sets come in at 40 to 50, maybe $100, depending on which one you're looking at. But they're all printed in China, right? And so, or overseas in Europe or something. And so those things are printed really cheaply. Now they use good paper oftentimes, but the cost to produce them is actually really low. It's the cost to ship them that costs a lot of money. But for small independent zine producers, it's daunting to go and print something in China. And so I'm not getting near the price point that a major publisher gets for their products, right? So in order to alleviate that stress, that's why zines are shorter. That's why they're smaller. That's why they cost more per page than than a big company does,
Right.
right? Yeah. And so this allows me to lower those costs somewhat.
That's awesome. I'm
Yeah.
glad you're able to get it, and I heard that, and I was like, "That is so cool that he," because I can just picture you kinda cranking down the press to flatten it out, sewing the binding together, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I had a perfect image in my head of, like, that's what Trevor's gonna be doing. That's so cool.
That's right. And so I got a lot of different tools. I got two board shears. These are basically big paper cutters that cut cardstock, like really thick cardstock that you use for cover books, for the
Yep.
thick stock and everything. I got two guillotines, which are big paper cutters that cut big stacks of paper. I got a drill press. It's a paper drill press from the 1940s. Two stamping machines, and a host of other things that go with all of that. And so there's a lot of equipment. And once I have it all up and running, I will be able to literally build just about anything I really want to.
That's
So,
awesome.
yeah.
So, what was it that drew you to DCC as like the primary system sales from?
Well, that's a good question. So Dungeon Crawl Classics has the type of mechanics that the first time I sat down and played it, which was only about 7 years ago now, when I first started to play it and run it, it felt like the games I was playing when I was 15, right? There
Yep.
was a lot of inherent danger in it. Things could escalate. There's a lot of vacillation potential, right? So if you think of Dungeons and Dragons, let's just take that as an example. Since late second edition, early third edition, on to fifth edition, things are basically, you could graph danger versus potential on your actions, and they're a very tight band as you go up in levels.
They are.
Right? So you can see where hitting a certain difficulty number or something is hard versus easy, and you can graph that. And as a matter of fact, they've done it many times, because third edition came out with that, challenge rating or challenge level, and scale. And then fourth edition kind of balanced that, so everything was in sync. Basically, when they gave you those CRs, fifth edition's loosened up on that, but it's all basically zoned so that you're always in this specific spot as you advance through levels. Dungeon Crawl Classics doesn't have that. It's inherently varied. There's a massive amount of potential in the die roll, because the dice can change, right? So you have what's called a dice chain. I may not always be rolling a d20. I might roll a d24. I might roll a d30. I might be penalized, and so I'm rolling a smaller die, a
Right.
d16 or a d14. And so what that does is it changes the distribution of possibilities without imposing a penalty that prevents either the top end or the bottom end of the dice roll from occurring. Right. So if I'm rolling a d20 and my action is inherently at a +6, I'm never going to roll anything lower than a 7. I may roll a natural 1, in which case that's always a failure, but I'm never going to roll lower than a 7 on that die roll, right?
Right.
On the other hand, if I'm actually just being imposed a 2-step penalty, I'm rolling a d14, I could still roll a natural 1, but I could also roll a natural 2. And so those things still exist. And that creates a lot of swinginess in the basic mechanics. So I also was really drawn to the spell system. I think it's inherently interesting in that failure is a possibility, and catastrophic failure is a real possibility.
Yes.
And so to me, that felt dangerous, right? The same thing is true with feats. The fumble system, which has echoes of Rollmaster but is much more streamlined, seems very nice and logical. So it was just a fun system to play with. It wasn't rules heavy. There wasn't excuse me, there wasn't there was all the inherent variability that I could see in third edition, but it was managed in a way that didn't feel clunky. So, things like mighty deeds allow a warrior to do lots of different things, right? But it's all based on narrative description, and then a dice roll to see how well you do. And it's not incumbent upon me specifically targeting and stacking feat combinations to get there.
Gotcha. Yeah. It is really cool with them.
Yeah. So those are the things that attracted me to Dungeon Crawl Classics. And now the truth is I've been developing my own game world and writing rules and alternate classes. And alternate experience systems, and a whole bunch of stuff for years. I've been, the Silver Ball, which is in issue 1 of Tales from the Smoking Wyrm, which is this device that basically allows you to remove players who aren't playing, and bring in players who weren't there last session. And then it has some funny tables that they have memory gaps, or they come back and they've got a tattoo on their back of a map or something. They don't remember how it got there, and stuff. That has been, it's been something I invented when I was 16, right? So I've been playing with it for like 30 years. And so there's been a whole bunch of that just sitting around in my brain anyway. And so I had, I've repeatedly in the past thought about writing my own material and publishing it. DCC just happens to be the time that it actually got off the ground. So
Nice.
yeah, so and it all came about from a trip to GaryCon, which is a convention in Wisconsin, um, in Lake Geneva. My friend Brian Gilkison and I were there, and Brian had a specific idea for a set of rules, and he's like, "We should publish this," and I said, "Yeah, we should do that plus more." And then we came back, and with another friend, John Olszewski, we sat down and kind of brainstormed the whole idea for the Smoking Wyrm.
Nice. Well, I
Yeah,
love what I've seen in issue 5. Like I told you before we went live, that's the first issue I've picked up. And I'm going to be grabbing 1 through 4 and obviously back 6.
wonderful,
It
wonderful.
is
Thank you
it
so
is
much.
such
I'm
a
glad you enjoy it.
fantastic zine. I love it. Um, so for
Well, I'm glad to hear
folks,
that.
well, you're more than welcome. For folks that may not be aware of Tales from the Smoking Worm that watch this, like say later tonight, can you give people a quick rundown of what they'll find in the zine for articles and, well, I'll let you tell them what the basic breakdown of the zine is, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Sure. So we take kind of a Dragon magazine type approach, right? So this is think of it as like a kind of like a comedy hour, right? Where you have a whole bunch of different skits. So we have a variety of articles. Some of them are continuing, but we always have a whole different, usually between 7 and 10 articles in a given zine issue, which is 60 pages, by the way. So it's about 2 to 3 times the size of an average zine. Um, so it's jam packed from inside cover to outside cover. And as a matter of fact, if you look at the covers, they're linked and there's a story being told on them and stuff. So you may not have seen that yet because you've only seen one issue. But in general, you're going to find alternate class ideas. You're going to find discussions about, um, you know, house rules. Just little tidbits. Hey, this little thing, this one little tweak of the rules allows us to play our game much better. You're going to find in Dungeon Crawl Classics, we have something called patrons, which are some kind of powerful magical being that wizards and elves can truck with and gain additional abilities. We usually have one in every issue. We usually have a new class in every issue. We have something called Culpepper's Herbal, which is an ongoing. Every issue has at least 2 to 3 herbs, and they're largely correct, right? So we use real world examples for the so far. We use most of the real facts about them, and then we do some research to see, what kind of things people say they can do for you, and we build on that, and we give them specific DCC abilities. Some of them are magical, some of them are poisonous, some of them, have different properties depending on what you do, whether it's with the flowers or the stems or the leaves or the roots. We really, you get a nice write up for each herb. And this is the goal ultimately is to do an herbal guide just for Dungeon Crawl Classics. It'll take me years to accomplish, but this pushes me through it. Um, and then you'll also find we've been working on, for instance, we had a 3-part article on rituals and ritual magic, showing how you could create rituals. Um, Dungeon Crawl Classics, the core rulebook, gives you some loose ideas on how to create rituals. We basically formalize that system, or gave a formalized version of it, and then gave variants of it. So the idea is that rituals are things that are powerful. They require time. They require resources more than a spell. And as a matter of fact, they have their own inherent die that they begin at. You always begin with rolling, I think it's a D4. And based on the other things in the ritual that you're able to pull together, your die goes up, and you may have a positive bonus to that. So if you can get a circle of wizards together, that can give you so many die bumps. If you get a whole bunch of followers to help, that gives you so many die bumps. You may have special conditions, like you need to have the blood of a unicorn, or the tears of a maiden, or something like this, or the liver of a goat, whatever it happens to be. Those all give you different benefits as well. And then what we did, what I really thought was really interesting with the ritual article, is we prevented variants of that. And so, or presented variants of that. And so there would be like, in this tome, this is how the ritual is laid out. But in this tome, it's slightly different. It still has the same effect, but it's a different way of getting to it. And it's the idea that different groups hit upon the same general thing, right? But they do it differently. And so, depending on what tradition of magic you follow, or whether you're a patron to Cthulhu, or whether you're patron to somebody else, you may have a totally different way of performing the same ritual and stuff. So that's a good example. After the ritual magic series was done, which was 3 issues, we picked up with organizations. And so, like, issue 5 in here has something called the School of the Tree, which is a very specific, in-depth look at basically European two-handed sword combat and dueling and stuff. It uses quite a few pulls off of real, European history, and then weaves it into kind of a fantastical organization that is specific for Dungeon Crawl Classics. In issue 4, for instance, we had the troll character class, which had 3 subvariants of trolls. So
Ooh.
you have that. There is an ongoing comic book in here called Onward Retainer, which is actually scripted, drawn, illustrated, penciled and inked and everything by a guy named Joel Phillips. Happens to be the person who got me back into Advanced Dungeons and Dragons and the Red Box and everything back in the 80s. And so he's my longest friend, and we talk 2 or 3 times a week, usually about gaming.
Nice.
So that's always there. There's a Wormwoods there, which is a puzzle of some sort, right? And it is directly related to the cool new words that you might find in the issue. So if you come across a word like susurration, right, which is a whispering or something like this, you don't know necessarily what that means. You could look it up and Google it, or you could go do the crossword puzzle in the back, which will have hints and give you the actual definition of those words. And so that was actually something my wife suggested, but it's a lot of fun to build all these different types of puzzles and everything. And the last thing we do when we develop an issue is we go through the final manuscripts and look for words that are different, that are not your common parlance, that are Gygaxian maybe in nature. And then that becomes the word list for the Wormwoods words feature and stuff. So yeah, so there's a host of things in there.
There's
Lots
a
of fun.
ton of stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
I love it. And I love the thought that goes into everything.
Oh, thank you.
Like, you can tell by the way you talk about it, one, the thought that goes into it, and the passion that which
Role-playing
amazing.
games are my hobby. That it's what I've been doing since I was 10. So yeah, it's something that I absolutely love and adore. You will find a lot of historical discussion as well. So one thing we do sometimes, depending on the article, is we'll track the development of a concept, right? Issue 1 had a paladin in it, and it wasn't a paladin like a normal class. This was a paladin that said any class could be a paladin. And as a matter of fact, since a paladin is really someone who is inherently kind of aligned with a goal, a god, a cleric actually casts an investiture spell upon you. You go on a quest, and if you succeed, you come back and become a paladin, and you gain these abilities by questing for it, which is a traditional kind of Dungeon Crawl Classics thing to do. And the idea was, we actually tracked the development of the paladin concept through gaming history as part of the introduction. So there was 3 or 4 paragraphs on, hey, this is where the paladin has been, and different game systems have done it differently, and here's where you can look that stuff up, and here's our take.
So cool.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
What are some of the stretch goals if they get hit? And one thing I was curious about also to do with the stretch goals is what made you decide to go with backer based stretch goals versus financial?
Oh, good question. Well, um, the reason for going with backer-based stretch goals is I'm trying to grow numbers. That's the
Gotcha.
actual goal, right? It's a simple metric, but I'm trying to grow exposure, and by growing exposure, I don't. And we have two general levels of rewards in the Kickstarter. There's a PDF option and a print option. The PDF option is much cheaper. Some people prefer PDF. Most people buy it because they want to just dip their toe in the well and see if it's worth buying, or they do it because they're PDF purists and they really have adopted that platform. Um, I honestly prefer the print version over anything. I'm a hand in my hands type of guy, and so that's why I build the print options, right? And so so because of that disparity in the pricing structure, it's not really about going for numbers in terms of dollars. It's about going for numbers in terms of backers. I'm trying to push exposure. I'm trying to get people to talk about the zine, right?
Gotcha.
Because if you can convince two or three of your friends to get involved, everybody benefits in the end.
Great.
So that's why we chose backer number is important. In terms of what you could get, I think it starts at about 350 backers, which was what we got to last time, 352 or 356 in issue 5. And so there, one of the things that we're doing in this issue is you're not only getting issue 6, but we gave as an optional add-on a development of an online platform. We have a major new type of article in issue 6, which is a generator article. This is a series of interlinked tables that help you generate something, build something bigger than some of its parts, right? And in this, what we've done is we've gone back to issue 3, where we created a creature called the Tentacular, which was something that is my answer to the Beholder, but different. And we had mentioned that Tentacular built nests, and these were and that Tentacular grow through the consumption of souls of wizards. And so baby Tentacular become adult Tentacular by literally killing and then eating the souls of wizards. That's what they have to have in order to go through the 2 or 3 life stages. At each life stage, they need a wizard's soul, right? Which means that there aren't many Tentacular in the world, which is probably for the better. But it also means that adult male Tentacular, who are the ones who stay on the prime material plane, they build these complex nests, and they build them for 2 reasons. One is to attract females, kind of like bowerbirds and stuff like this from the South Pacific Islands. And then 2, because they create these mazes of death traps and everything. And they go and they catch adventuring parties and they drop them into their mazes, their maze-like nest, and then they let their children, their younglings, hunt you down and everything. And so the whole thing is designed with this dual purpose of attracting females and letting, and teaching their younglings teachings, hunting skills. And if there happens to be a wizard in there, one of them's going to age up, and that's great too. So this created a dynamic where it was easy and for a DM on the fly, a judge on the fly, to take 35-40 minutes, roll up an entire schematic of a dungeon that is really kind of like a fun house slash grindhouse type style game. Doesn't require a lot of forethought, and then actually just throw a whole bunch of stuff at players, right? And it puts them in a unique situation. So we knew we had this kind of thing set up, and of course we play tested it. We play tested it quite a bit, actually. One of the ways we play tested it is I have a really good friend who I've gamed with since high school, who happens to be a computer programmer. And when I handed in the rules and I said, "Could you play test this for me? Could you generate a couple nests?" He said, "Well, I could do that, but that's not really helpful for you." He's like, what we should do is we should test the internal logic of the nest generator. So I'm going to program the nest for you. I'm going to show you how it works through every step. And he's like, and if it breaks, if we can't get you from one step to the next, that the logic is internally bad. right? And then you'll know what part you've got to fix. And so he programmed the whole thing, and you could sit there and like click a button and just generate millions of nests. It was really neat.
That is so
And
cool.
and so I said, this is a great idea. And he's like, well, Trevor, he's like, you can have this. He's like, and he's like, we could offer it to people and stuff. And one of the things that we need, I mean, I have all this bookbinding equipment, but I do need computer equipment. And we were looking at having to find a really stable, reliable, forward-thinking platform for saving data, because we've begun to gather a whole bunch of assets and stuff, right? Digital assets. And I need them organized in such a way that they can be accessed and everything. That's kind of a behind the scenes thing. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Something that a company needs. And so I was like, well, what we'll do is we'll offer a $5 online membership, and you'll get full access to the Tentacular Nest generator. And then we'll go back in the archive of issues, and we'll create generators for like the player characters. So you can create, a 10th level Beastmaster or whatever it is that you happen to want to build, and it'll just kit it all out. I mean, like, this is all just easy to do, with the help of my friend and everything. And he's like, yeah, that's a great. He's like, I'd love to help you do that, so I can help you get that all set up. And so we're offering issue 6, but we're also offering an online access to the Tentacular Nest generator, which will save you 45 or 50 minutes. You literally hit a button, it generates the nest. You can look at it and say, do I want this? Do I don't? It's really cool. And it even generates the Tentacular that you would need, that you have to have issue 3 for, because that's where the Tentacular are generated, because they have an entire generation system themselves. And so that's the point of the Kickstarter. I think I lost the point of your question, though. Can you repeat it?
Yes. Now I've got to go back. I was so enthralled by what you were talking about that
Oh, cool.
let's see, I did that one. That. I actually asked what some of the stretch goals were. Sorry. And why
Oh,
you had
so
gone.
that gets us to the first stretch goal. The first stretch goal is if we hit 250 people, and that's still possible, we'll release a free version of the Tentacular Nest generator that will allow you to generate up to 6 rooms with associated tunnels for free. That'll be free to the public. People who paid for access will get access to the full Nest generator, which can generate up to 36 rooms, which is the largest recorded Tentacular Nest ever, right? After that, let me actually just scroll down here. I've got it up on my phone. At 300 backers, or sorry, that's at 350. At 400 backers, we've been generating character sheets. So for our new classes, because they don't have character sheets and standard character sheets don't work for them. So last Kickstarter for issue 5, we created the Beastmaster class, and I created a Beastmaster character sheet, and only about 10 people bought character booklets or sheets for it. But what we wanted to do was release it free as a PDF. And I've done that for the troll class. There's a free PDF on the SmokingWyrm.com. You can just go download the character sheet. And so we had that as a stretch goal last time. It didn't fund. We didn't get to that many backers. So I added it to the new class in issue 6, which is the Soul Eater, kind of an anti-wizard. They steal spells as wizards cast them, or if wizards mess them up and lose the spell, they can just consume them too. And we'll give both of those away as free PDFs forever. They'll just go on the website for free if we can hit 400 backers. At 450 backers, we're going to release a font for free. And the reason that font exists has to do with the origins of how we built Tales from the Smoking Wyrm. So a long time ago in the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide, there was a full page piece of art called Emiracal's Last Ride. It's done by Dave Trampier. Okay, and Emiracal's Last Ride has got this wizard, Emiracal, on horseback, and he's pointing at someone and casting a spell, probably like magic missile or something. And then there are guards and everything coming out of the buildings. Well, it turns out that the street that this takes place in a city, the street that Trampier drew is a real street. It's in Rhodes, Greece, on an island, right? And so when Goodman Games released, and the history of this is really interesting. When Goodman Games released the DCC RPG, they released a piece of art. It's a full-page piece called, I think it's called Lokaramon's Revenge or something like this. or Locaramon the Lawful. And it essentially has Locaramon, that's an anagram of a Miracle, casting a spell, or actually summoning a demon or something like this, something to deal with a Miracle. And it's done up, right? When we built the Tales from the Smoking Wyrm, the reason it has the name it does is Trampier, the artist, drew a cartoon in Dragon magazine called Wyrmy, right? And Wyrmy was a worm, had a whole bunch of trolls and ogres that worked with him, and he liked to play pool, and he had like an Andy Cap type of cap hat, right?
Yep.
So the cap came down over his eyes. You really never saw his eyes, and he smoked a cigar, right? So if I remember the story correctly, or the art correctly, in the Trampier piece, they're passing an inn, and it's called the Green Dragon, right? Well, Wyrmy was green, and so in the DCC homage, it's called the Smoking Wyrm, and it's a little picture of Wyrmy in the sign. So when we invented the Smoking Wyrm, we were like, well, we'll just call it the Smoking Wyrm, because it doesn't have the theme is whatever we can fit in the issue, right? It's like a Dragon magazine, but we needed to have a nice name for it. And so Brian came up with this connection, and he and I got to talking about it. I was like, this is brilliant. So we drew a dragon that is an homage to the original Trampier piece, but called it the Smoking Wyrm, which is an homage to the homage and everything. So fast forward to issue 5 or issue 6, and we have over the years, TSR did a couple things with Miracle. Goodman Games has done a couple things with the Wizard Miracle. One of the things that, and actually the Role Playing Gamers Association, the RPGA, had an artifact that it gave out during the 3rd edition era for Greyhawk called the Fist of Miracle, which is a really big. It's essentially a ivory colored die. It's about 1.5 inches across. It's a D20, and it has specific sigils on it. And you basically roll it. It's like a deck of many things. Like you roll it, and whatever comes up on the roll, that's the spell that's cast, or that's the special ability that's cast. So Brian and I were talking, and so Brian's a big fan of the Living Greyhawk when it was being run and everything, and he was like, we could update this to a D30, which is really the die symbol of Dungeon Crawl Classics, right? Because it's the end of the dice chain. He's like, so we could create a D30 version of the Fist of Miracle. He's like, and one of the things we did, if you look at the first edition, or the first issue cover of Smoking Wyrm, so Miracle is chaotic, Locaramon is lawful, right? But there's no neutral wizard that's ever mentioned. So we created one. His name is Necromilo, and which is again an anagram of Miracle. So he is Necromilo the neutral, and he's on the cover of issue 1, and stuff. And so we started playing with these concepts, and Brian's like, well, I think we should make a D30 with a whole bunch of symbols on it, and it will be something that Necromilo took from Miracle and then modified, right? Or maybe it has changing shape through time. We left that kind of vague, and so we literally, in order to print the sigils, this is like a long-winded answer. In order to print the sigils, Brian chose them, I drew them, and then we had a font made, because it's easier to place a font in tables than it is to place a piece of art, right? It's a lot less work.
Yeah.
And the font can be sized, a true type font can be sized to any size you want it. It's always nice and clean and sharp, right? Well, we had a font, and we had access to a D30, a digital D30, and a friend of ours, his name is Ken Robkins, who worked with us on Hangman's Garden, which was another product we put out that had a whole bunch of 3D printed miniatures in it. He offered to put the font on the faces of the D30. And so this is the very first 3D printed version of Necromilo's Bauble, which is in issue 6. So at 450 backers, we're releasing the font for free. It's you can use it for Windows, you can use it for for PC, for Mac. You have we There's two types of font suitcases. Both types we have access to. We've got They're free. We'll give them away to everybody, and you can use the font however you want. It's got 30 different letters in it. And they tie directly to the article that's in the issue 6. At 500 backers, we will give away the STL file for this D30. And so those are the stretch goals.
That is sweet. Is that resin printed or?
This is resin printed. And what I'm going to do with it, I'm actually, this is, like I said, this is the very first one that we printed. It's got a couple problems on it that are just support problems. So I'm going to go in and fix those support problems with a couple other supports. And then I am going to, I'm a longtime caster of resin and everything and stuff. And so I'm going to polish the new one up once I get it to where I want it. And then I will probably make a mold of it and cast it really nice and sharp and on a final version. So there may be a couple of those coming, later, but it'll take me months to do all that work. But yeah, so those are the stretch goals. Now that took like 20 minutes to get through, but now every stretch goal has a purpose, and they kind of have dual purposes, right? We generate things and we like to give them away, but I also like to do it for something, right? So hey, this gives people an impetus. I'd really like to get that PDF of that character sheet. We are probably not going to hit the the character sheet levels and stuff. It's always possible, but I never say never. But if not, those will roll over into the next issue and stuff.
Gotcha.
And so those stretch goals will just become cumulative until they're so awesome that we will hit those. So yeah, that's the goal.
Mark Finn is in the chat, and he said you had him in a new font, Trevor. And then when you mentioned the bauble, he said, "Oh, hell yes."
That's how it should be. Thanks, Mark. Right? I mean, isn't it cool?
It is. Like, that is amazing. I saw that on the update that you had posted, and I have FDM printers, and I was like, that's got to be resin, as clean as that look. But
yeah,
I was just
it makes such a satisfying sound when it hits the table.
I bet.
And everything. And of course, if you get the STL file, I printed mine at 156% because I wanted it to fit in my hand. You can print it bigger. That's absolutely not a problem.
Right? I just picture one like this big and kind of tossing it across the table.
Just toss it down the table, right? That'd be awesome. So there is a license for it and everything for non-commercial use, and that will go if we do hit 500 backers, then everybody will get it, and we'll be good to go. So yeah,
that is so cool. Like, I love that.
Thanks.
And the font is brilliant. Like, I'm loving so much about this. I'm so glad.
Well, and that was a nice test case. So often what you'll see, if you look at my Kickstarters and you look at what we're doing, new things are often a test case of things to come. And so with that being said, it's just, this is not the only font I'm going to make. So years ago, I developed an entire language font, an entire language, and it's built on flames. So there are different little flame sigils that you put together and stuff, and everything. And so I will eventually draw that out and digitize it and make that into a font. It will be tied to a new class. The dwarves from the elemental plane of fire called the Azir. I had built them as a player character class long before they eventually built them in D&D. And so I'll probably update that to DCC and release them. I'm not sure. It'll probably be next year. This year's issues are finalized, so it'll be next year that we do that, and it'll come with a font. So you'll be able to type up secret letters or something and that Aziri are using to pass back and forth to each other, and then your players can decipher them and stuff. Those are the kinds of cool things that I like to do. So yeah.
That is cool. That is super cool. You had actually mentioned something earlier about Cthulhu, and I noticed one of the things in here for Tales of the Smoking Wyrm issue 6 were the missions. And without giving away too much, what can you tell people about those missions?
I can tell you that they are Nick Barron's fault. That's what I can tell you. Nick Barron did a really great just review that I love. So it must have been really positive, of Tales from the Smoking Wyrm #3 on YouTube. He did it. He really enjoyed the issue so much. He did the review twice.
Wow.
And so there's an 8-minute version. There's like a 15-minute version. And he told me actually when he and I were talking that he did a third time, but it was like 45 minutes, and he thought that was too much time. So that one never got put out publicly. So when he did the review, this was for an Archamental. If you think back to the first edition Monster Manual and stuff, there were these great elemental lords, and they're called Archamentals, right? I'm pretty sure that term hasn't been used much since. But I wanted to create a patron of Elemental Earth for a campaign that I was running, and the patron's name is Dornivis, and he is one of the 5 Archamentals of Earth, of the elemental plane of Earth. So in that review, Nick said, I absolutely love, and I'm semi-quoting here, I absolutely love Dornivis. He's perfect for what I want to do in my game world. He's like, but what I don't have is a whole bunch of stuff that tells me how I could use him, right? And, I don't have any, patrons are a quid pro quo thing. I give you a little bit of ability, you do things for me. And so, he's like, I don't have any missions. I don't have any adventures that are involved with Dornivis. So I don't know how Trevor conceived of using him, right? Which I thought was a valid complaint. And so I immediately wrote down patron missions. We do 7 of them for each patron. Last issue, or issue 5, we did 5 patron missions for Dornivis. So Nick, mission accomplished. And we will continue to do this as an ongoing regular series. I have a writer, writer / co-writer, Jose Cardozo. I just butchered his name, and I apologize, Jose. But he does the primary writing on those articles, and then he and I talk about what the patron, like what every single one of my patrons will get done that way. So issue 1 had Cthulhu, and issue 6 has Cthulhu missions. Issue 2 had King of Beasts. I believe King of Beasts is in issue 7, maybe not. Maybe it'll be this year. And then issue 3 had Dornivis, and issue 5 had Dornivis missions. And so issue 6 is going to have Cthulhu missions. There are 7 missions, right? Dungeon Crawl Classics has a D7 die, and you can just roll this, and they're little paragraphs that if they have a monster or something in it, they'll give you the stats most of the time. But it's a primer for a mission that is meant to be small enough that can be done in the middle of a normal campaign. So if you're in the middle of a dungeon crawl or a hex crawl or something like this, these missions, we have hex crawl type missions and dungeon crawl type missions and all sorts of things that are tailored to that patron, that help formalize the patron's interests, right? And that your agent or your adherent can do as they rack up invoke patrons and everything, because you get access to the patron by invoking them. It's a spell you cast,
Right.
And then the patron gives you some power, and then, like I said, then they have an interest in you. You need to do something for them. So the more of these things you rack up, the bigger the thing should be. And it's an aspect of DCC that's never been truly explored, as far as I'm concerned. And so I thought that the idea that Nick presented really fleshed out patrons. And so we're going to have 7 different missions. They're short paragraphs. They are the first of a series of patron related articles. The next one you're going to see probably next year is we're going to start doing patron lairs.
Nice.
And so these could be locations that are aligned with that patron, whether it's something the patron wants to take over, or it's something the patron controls, or it's something that you can commune with the patron at, or things like that, right? Every patron's different, and we wanted to highlight those differences. And so we'll be doing patrons. We've even talked to Goodman Games about doing patron missions, for instance, for some of the patrons in the core rulebook. And barring, we got the tentative okay to do that, and so we've been writing those up, and we'll, as every issue goes, they get approved and stuff. So you'll start seeing some of those get peppered in over the next year or two.
Nice. I
Yeah.
love how you have taken and interwoven all of these scenes together, like Cthulhu being in issue one, his missions are six, and or missions are in issue six. And I just think it's so cool how all of these issues are so tied together.
Well, thank you. And as a matter of fact, they're very deeply tied. Issue 5 has Cthulhu idols. They're called ominous idols. Is the title of the article. Here's the front page to it and everything. But this is literally nobody. I was working on something. I can't remember what article I was working on. This was a side article of this. And I was like, I realized that nobody had ever really, in the Call of Cthulhu, H.P. Lovecraft highlights that the artists and everything who are affected by the Dreaming of Cthulhu sculpt sculptures of Cthulhu,
Yes.
right? Yeah. And then people worship that. Cults worship those, but they never tell you about the idols themselves. They're just an artifact. And I was like, well, what if they were like a magic item that is literally sculpted out of the will of, Cthulhu's dream sending and then interpreted through the hands of the person affected? And that's what Ominous Idols does. We give you lots of different illustrations of Cthulhu idols. And if you read through it, it allows you to give the idol a special purpose, goals, and special abilities. And so it's an entire magic item generation system specifically for Cthulhu idols, or anybody else who happens to have an idol, right? We tie in many other things there too. So we continue to build on these concepts and then bring them back. I think it's actually the fun part. This issue 5 has a little note in it that says there's actually a column in one of those tables in that Ominous Idols that says, ignore this column if you don't have the Priests of Cthulhu rules or Cleric of Cthulhu rules. Well, those won't be out until next year. But it's something we've been working on, is building the full cleric rules a la kind of Goodman Games DCC annual, so that because you can have clerics of Cthulhu as well, and not just patrons. And so in DCC, Cthulhu is a god, identified as a god in the core rule book, and so we're gonna hopefully get some rules out there for him. And so we've clearly been working on that. I find connections really make things fun, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you find them accidentally. Sometimes I point them out in an editorial note, but yeah.
Yeah, it is super cool. And it's so cool. I don't know what else to say. And if I got this right, you and Brian first conceived of putting Cthulhu into Tales of the Smoking Wyrm back at GaryCon 10, right?
That's right. So as a matter of fact, Brian picked up a randomly generated character that was a patron. It was an agent of Cthulhu, and there's no rules for that. And at the end of the session, we had a great time, by the way. I can't remember who we were running under, but we had a great time. But at the end of the session, Brian looked at me and he said, gosh, we should write up rules for Cthulhu as a patron. That would be a lot of fun. And I said, absolutely, let's publish it. That right there is the reason why Tales from the Smoking Wyrm exists, because the name came later and everything. It was that game session sitting at GaryCon and Brian saying, hey, we should do this. And it was like, yeah, I've been waiting to do this stuff for 25, 30 years. Absolutely, I can do this. So,
and that's where Tales from the Smoking Wyrm was born.
That's where it was born.
Wow.
Sitting in that game tail.
That is pretty cool. So to go back to something you had mentioned earlier in our conversation, the Soul Eater class, it sounds so neat, the fact that they're able to consume magic. After they have consumed the magic, what do they do? I have this picture in my head, at least, of them kind of holding their hand up, soaking in the magic, and then blasting it back at the caster.
Oh, well, okay. So you can actually do that.
That is cool.
So the Soul Eater has, first of all, the Soul Eater is so, they're like, magic they're attracted to magic in such a way that as they walk through an area, they literally dampen the magic around them because they're absorbing it into their body just inherently.
Nice.
right? And so there's this kind of like, and it comes with its own little effect. It might be a low hum. Wherever the Soul Eater goes, you might, your voice is normally, loud like this, and then suddenly it's a whisper, right? Or, things are, there's something uneasy about a Soul Eater. They're a little unnerving because they're constantly pulling magic into themselves inherently. And then on top of that, they can do a couple different things. The first thing they can do is they can counterspell any spell a wizard or elf casts,
Oh, wow.
right? Flat out, they can counterspell any spell. And honestly, that is why the Soul Eater class exists, because I wanted someone, you never get into spell duels. They're just really rare. And I was like, I want a class that is really good at spell dueling. Now, if they win the spell duel, they absorb the spell, right? And they internalize it. And that allows them to build up some power. That power could be that they can cast that spell back out, or they can use it to do things like they can heal themselves, or they could then internalize it, externalize it and heal somebody else. There's a very refined, kind of defined list of things that the Soul Eater can do with that magical power. Mostly for themselves, but I thought it was kind of neat that they could basically take if it was a second level spell, they could heal 2d4 on somebody by sacrificing that spell. So that's a huge power sink to dump into a spell to get a 2d4 healing. But since only clerics can heal in the core rules, it's kind of a neat ability. So they can also passively just kind of suck in spells as wizards lose them, right? Because no matter what your level of spell is that you're casting on a natural die roll, you have about a 50-50 chance of losing that spell every time you cast it. It's bumped up by spell level or by caster level and stuff. But you can still, there's a real risk every time you cast a spell of losing it. When you lose that spell or when you fail, the Soul Eater absorbs your spell for the day. You lose it as if you'd lost it, as
Oh,
if you'd rolled a
boy.
natural one, and the Soul Eater takes it in and then can do whatever he wants with it or she wants with it.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So I think it's actually a really neat class. It's different if you run a magic heavy game, if you're into the sorcery as well as the swords part of Appendix N. This could be a really dynamic class. If you don't ever fight or face wizards as an opponent, not so great, but it just, every party's mileage is going to vary. So that's true of any class though, right? I mean,
Right.
if you never trap your dungeons, what's the point of having a thief?
Right.
So
Exactly.
yeah. So the Soul Eater is a very different type of class, something I've been thinking about for a long time. And we've been actively playtesting it now for 6 months. It seems to work really well.
It's like I read that on the Kickstarter page. Just like, that sounds so neat, being able to absorb the map.
Yeah.
And you just made it sound even.
Well, awesome. Hopefully you get to play it. And if you look at the character sheet, it's absolutely, 60s and 70s, crazy, right?
Yeah,
It's
it's
got
got all those
bright,
neon colors and everything
yeah,
on it.
yeah. So it's absolutely a crazy character sheet. It's really cool. Yeah. And it has a hint, by the way, for an upcoming class that will be showing up later this year
Oh,
on
man.
the character sheet.
When we wrap this up, I'm going to jump back to the Kickstarter page and zoom in on that and see what I can find.
Check it out. Yep. Excuse me, my allergies have been acting
Oh,
up.
you're quite all right. Um, Another thing I'd like to touch back on that you brought up was Culpepper's Herbal.
Okay.
And what can you tell me about the two new herbs that you're introducing?
Issue 6 has Alexander's and Barberry, right? And to be honest, I've written about 10 herbs since then. I don't remember exactly what they have. Give me a second and I'll
Yeah.
look. Yeah.
While you're doing
So
that, I just want to let you know Mark chimed back in and said a D30 Fist of Emrakul updated is the most DCC thing he's ever heard of.
absolutely the way it should be.
Yeah.
The way it should be. You know what? Oh, I think I can get to it this way. I actually am disconnected from my storage drive, but I happen to have all those files sitting in the Creative Cloud. All right, so Barberry, let's start with it. So everything is tied to an astrology, right? And I use different moons. I actually use the moons for my game world. And so everything is tied, every herb is tied to at least one different moon and everything. So let me look here. The shoots. Okay, so you can basically blend up the shoots. They make an excellent tonic for expelling body choleric humors, such as ringworms, hookworms, and everything. That's a really common kind of thing you might encounter as an adventurer. Things we don't normally talk about, but if you I have a little note in here that the leaves can possibly repulse cockatrices. And so there's maybe some rules on that. Let me look. Flowers seem to have honorable qualities. And so like here. Oh, and yeah, there is a recipe using the berries in a pie that increases the vigor of the body and the mind. It imparts a +1d to both fortitude and will saves for 2d3 hours after consumption. And the roots have an antiseptic quality to them. And so basically, if you create a tincture from them, you can reduce the harm from lingering wounds. So if you have a wound that's sticking around because maybe of a critical, you can reduce how it impacts you and
Nice.
stuff. Alexander's, again, it's a wild parsley, basically, right? The shoots are hollow, so they make excellent straws. So everything can be mundane items to magical uses for them, right? So as a matter of fact, and Alexanders are really big. They're like 4 to 5 foot tall as a plant. So these shoots, the actual stems that are hollow, can get quite large. The priests of a god named Don actually use them as molds for their taper candles, used to mark the death dates of their eternal parishioners and to protect their graveyards. The leaves have a stranguary component, so they basically dry things out, right? They can be boiled into a wine or bruised freshly and added to warm spiced wines of the Highlands. It's a folk remedy, not usually chosen by professional herbalists, but some people use it. Flowers are bitter. They're good at withdrawing serpent venom. You get to re-roll any associated saves at a +1d if applied within 1d3 rounds of the first strike. And they can drastically reduce ability loss as well. Roots, if chewed fresh, are good for the control of abuses to your digestive tract, but are not otherwise palatable. And so it depends on what herbs I'm working with. So Culpeper's Herbal is a textbook that originally came out in the 16th century, I believe, or something like that. As a matter of fact, it's one of the 2 books that's most been in print, continuously in print ever since it was created, the other one being the Bible. And so Culpeper's Herbal was Culpeper was he was the son of a noble or something. He went to medical school and decided he didn't like the hucksterism that doctors were practicing at the time, where they would charge exorbitant fees for remedies using plants that were in like the backyards of people's houses, but they didn't know what those plants could do. And so he wrote the herbal specifically to get back at doctors and to kind of democratize medicine, right?
Interesting.
And so, as a matter of fact, the herbals were so revered by parishioners, by common people. Villages would put their money together to buy one copy, so the village had a copy of the herbal. so they
Hmm.
could then read it and figure out what they could do to remedy their common ailments and everything without having to go to an expensive doctor individually. And so it's a very early version of like socialism. It's crazy. But this book has remained in print for over 400 years.
Wow.
And so, I was looking for things to put into issue one, and I've always liked herbalism and stuff. And so I started Culpepper's Herbal. I changed. Culpepper actually has a little write up. I think that's in issue two. Um, she's a woman in my game world, and we give a little bit of backstory to her and stuff like that. And she's responsible for an herbal academy and everything. And so the goal ultimately is to just write these continuously, and then I have a monograph project that's coming up that will feature about 30 herbals, 30 different ones. It's called the Poison Gardens of Calabesh Moog. And so it's a location, but it's this entire herbal business that's run by this guy Calabesh Moog. But it also has an extra like 30 of Culpepper's write-ups that Calabesh uses to make his poisons and stuff and everything. So there'll be others of these, and then eventually, when I get about 200 or 300 of them, or about 100 of them at a time, I will actually compile them into books. I think it's going to be a 4-volume set of herbal, and so I'll hand bind some of those and hand print those, and then some of those, I'll probably have a mass produced version as well.
Nice.
So that's the goal. It's a long-term goal. It'll probably take me at least another year and a half to finish the first volume.
Wow.
So, but I do the writing and the art on those.
That is cool.
Yeah.
Um,
So
so with just roughly now, since we started talking, about 16 hours left, what would you say to anyone sitting there hovering over the back this project?
well, I mean, obviously hit the button, right? Back the project. I think that Tales from the Smoking Worm offers an excellent quality, basically a good read for your money. It is, like I said, 2 to 3 times the size of any standard zine, which is usually between 24 and 30 or 36 pages. Some of them get up to 48. Um, and we work tirelessly on these issues, right? So every article has probably got at least 6 or 7 drafts. They're well written. We think about them. Actually, they go through developmental edits for usability and accessibility in the game by editors who work for Goodman Games themselves now. And as a matter of fact, and then they're well done and well illustrated.
Yes, they are very well.
The limited edition is archival quality paper, and when you support the limited edition of Tales from the Smoking Worm, you're not supporting just my local business, my small business, but it's actually printed right now by a small business in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Um, there's a whole host of add-ons you can add. One of them being the boxes. The Smoking Worm boxes are a perennial favorite. Actually, they continue to amaze me how many people buy them every issue that we put on Kickstarter, and those are made by a small company in Marion, Indiana, one of the last original paper box companies left in the United States. They used to be in every major city, and about 40 years ago, the paper box industry collapsed under the weight of foreign box making, and so all of those companies, dried up and disappeared. And these people make boxes using the same type of equipment that I use to make my bookbinding stuff. So there's a whole host of little small businesses that you're supporting by supporting Tales from the Smoking Worm.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, Trevor, I feel like we covered a lot of what Tales of the Smoking Worm issue 6 has to offer. Is there anything that I've missed or skipped over that you'd still like to cover? I mean, I could talk for hours about.
I mean, we've talked about the nests. So issue 6 will have its own sleeve. I haven't mentioned this. And so this is a sleeve for tarot size cards. There'll be a 4x6 inch sleeve on it, and it'll have actual pull-out example nests that'll be totally written. It's the
Ooh,
playtest version that I've been using. It'll be nicely laid out, and so with that little fold-out piece of paper, you'll basically be able to run an entire nest that I've generated and given to you. So it's an example. It's kind of the first of that type of stuff. I'm going to probably have more things that are pulled out and handmade to add to these things. There's also a whole article on dwarven luck. So, luck is a major component of Dungeon Crawl Classics. And this article explores, well, what if dwarven luck was a little different? And what could dwarves do with their luck? As a matter of fact, if I remember correctly, it's called grudge. And so you basically transform luck into grudge, and there's a whole bunch of basically species specific advantages or advantageous things that dwarves can do with their luck. We got a great little one-page article. It's not even a page; it's a paragraph called "Coordinated Efforts," and it's the standard way that I use to let players help each other when they're making it's kind of skill-based checks. And so that's totally written up. It's gonna have a great piece of art to go with it. So yeah, I think there's tons of great things in here, and issue 6 is gonna be it's gonna be a great issue.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Absolutely, Dave.
I have had a fantastic time talking with you about this. And folks out there that are watching or will watch later, if you enjoy this interview, give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, head on over to Kickstarter and back Tales from the Smoking Wyrm issue 6. There's a link in the description as well as a link to the Smoking Wyrm website below. Yeah, so folks, all I really have left to say is be safe, have fun, and happy gaming. Good night, everyone.